Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Creating Neuro-Inclusive Schools. My name is Victoria Bagnall, and I'm going to be hosting this webinar today, and I cannot wait to get into the slides with you and to share all of my research and knowledge and expertise over the last, gosh, how long has it been? Almost 10 years now since I first found out about executive functioning and the links with neurodiversity. So wonderful to have you all here. We've got hundreds of people signed up. So it's wonderful to see so many people interested in this topic. And it's very apt at the moment. In fact, I was just listening to Women's Hour and they're doing a series on SEND at the moment, which is fascinating. If anyone wants to listen to that too, I do recommend it. Fabulous. So I'm going to get started with my slides. So hopefully you're going to be able to see this. Oh, before I do that, I should just let you know that my colleague Pranell is in the audience as well. And she has been tasked with putting links to all sorts of important things like the Mentimeter that we're going to be using and also the handout that we are offering you as well into the chat. So if you see Pranell popping up with stuff, that is completely endorsed by me. It's not someone hijacking the chat. And please do make use of all the resources she's going to be sharing with you there. So here we are. Fabulous. Fantastic. I don't see that she's there quite yet, but she will be coming forward with those links. Oh, there we are. She has done it now as I speak. So we've got the digital handout link there for you to download. Super. So let's get started then. So we are going to be having an interactive presentation today, which means that we're going to be using something called Mentimeter, which allows you to contribute towards the slides that we're going to be co-creating together. So please do get involved. You can follow the link in the chat, and when you get to the slide, it should just say Get Interactive link in the chat. If you just like the bottom corner of that page, that just shows me that you've managed to access it there and that you have made connection with that. So I think the link should be in the chat, but if not, you can use a QR code on your screen and you can use your phone to access it through that. Super. Just a couple of people seem to have managed to access it. If you have managed to get on there, please do like the bottom corner, the bottom right-hand corner of the page, and that will just allow me to see that we've got lots of people there. We are super fabulous. Super. Now, as we go through, Pranell will keep putting the link into the chat. So if anyone else does join, it will be there because with Zoom, you can't see the chat if you weren't there before. So thank you, Pranell, for doing that. I know lots of people have just joined in the last couple of seconds. Super fabulous. Okay, so just a bit of housekeeping. I'm just going to talk to you about my aims for this talk. So we're going to be talking about the SEND crisis, and then we're going to be looking at executive functions, neurodiversity and trauma, why connection, relationships and belonging are fundamental to personal development, and then finally how we can develop a whole school approach that's compassionate and can help everybody flourish. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Going to be taking you through some theory and then we're going to get really practical at the end. So first of all, I would like to find out who I'm talking to. So if you wouldn't mind on your Mentimeter, just take a look at this slide, well, on your phones, and let me know who are you. So Pranell, I think, has just put these in here. Super. So it should be in the chat if you're new, if you've just joined in the chat, follow the link to the Mentimeter and you should be able to contribute towards this. Super. Lovely to see such a spread of people here. Fantastic. Got many more people online, so please do join in. It's quite, not only is it quite fun, but it does deepen your learning and can really help other people to understand that this isn't just them that we're speaking to, but there's a whole host of people here. So please do get involved. I know sometimes it's easier to just sit back and listen, but do get involved if you can. It will deepen your learning. Fabulous. So we've got lots of parents here, wonderful to see, senior leaders from schools, classroom teachers, education psychologists, SENCOs, learning specialists, tutors, and lots of others as well. And there are many more that haven't accessed this yet, but I think it's probably representative of the group. So a real spread of stakeholders who are interested in building neuro-inclusive schools. So you're very welcome here, and I'm looking forward to sharing what I know with you all. So my name is Victoria Bagnall, and I am one of the co-founders and the managing director of Connections in Mind, which is the organisation that I'm speaking on behalf of today. I am dyslexic, which means that I'm neurodivergent, different from neurotypical, in that my brain thinks and does things in a different way to the average. So despite my dyslexia, I did manage to get to the University of Cambridge to read geography, and I am a qualified secondary geography teacher. I'm also a mother of 3 gorgeous girls. I have a 13-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old. As I said, co-founder of Connections in Mind, and also an organisation called The Code, which offers executive function aware tutoring as well. So I'm just going to briefly touch on my light bulb moment. I go into this in more depth when we do the kind of general introduction to executive functions, or what we're renaming as Our Brains Explained webinar, which will be happening monthly. So do look out for that, and do send people our way if they want to learn more about that. But for today, I'm just going to briefly talk about my light bulb moment. And at Connections in Mind, we think of our light bulb moment as the moment when we find out about executive functioning and how the brain works, and it brings all of the challenges that the young people in our care face into focus and helps us to understand so much more about how to support and care for them. So I'm hoping that lots of you are going to have a light bulb moment today, but I'm going to talk to you briefly about my light bulb moment. So just briefly, I was working as a SEN tutor alongside a young lady who got the highest ever score of the thinking skills assessment for Oxford University. And she was really struggling with what I now know is her executive functioning, but she was really disorganized, never got any work in on time. Her room was a mess. And as a result, she was really struggling with her mental health. And I was working with a psychiatrist on her particular case. I said to the psychiatrist, I just can't understand, how can she be so bright, but yet so incapable of doing these basic things? And the psychiatrist said to me, you've got to read this book. She recommended Smart But Scattered Teens. And it was just my light bulb moment. I was like, oh my goodness, this is this young lady. This was me when I was growing up as a neurodivergent young person in a neurotypical world. And it just made so much sense to me. So I read the book from cover to cover and then jumped on the next plane to Boston to go to a training with Dr. Peg Dawson, who is pictured here, who's one of the authors. And I took her out to lunch and I said, Peg, will you come to the UK? We need your training in the UK. And of course, in her wonderful, generous way, she agreed. And we hosted the first ever training of executive function coaches back in 2015. And it was at that training that I met Imogen Moore-Shelley and later Dr. Bettina Honan, and we founded Connections in Mind together. And we have this kind of shared belief that knowledge of our brains and our brain states helps us to be kinder to ourselves and to those around us. And that's really the kind of pinnacle, or the underlying mission, I suppose, of what we're doing. And since then, sadly, Imogen has passed away, which has been incredibly sad for us all. And Bettina is now publishing incredible books about the teenage brain, and her amazing podcast as well. But this kind of key understanding that this knowledge, this kind of education piece, has the power to change the world is what runs under everything that we do at Connections in Mind. So just to paint a picture on what we're dealing with SEND, I'm sure if I'm speaking to senior leaders and teachers, you're very aware of this, that numbers of children with SEND, that special educational needs and disability, are on the rise. So this is from kindly from Special Needs Jungle, and they used the data to present this wonderful graph, and it shows that it has gone up by 0.7% over the last 12 months. The figures for obviously for 2024 haven't come out yet. And there's this kind of progressive rise of numbers of children with SEND. So it's a growing problem that all schools are aware of. But yet, local authorities are in massive deficits in terms of their SEND provision. So the Local Government Association has estimated that in 2025, so next year, the deficit will run into £3.6 billion. So that's the amount of money that local authorities are borrowing to serve the needs of SEND children. Of course, that is not sustainable, and really needs to be looked at urgently. So the current model of serving young people who have SEND or are neurodivergent in alternate provisions or alternate education establishments is not working for everybody. And we're going to be presenting today a way that we can serve the needs of the vast majority of young people within the mainstream education system. It will need looking at and reinventing, but there are things that every school can do to work towards that right now under the current guidelines from the Department for Education. Also, it's really important to remember that teachers are saying that their workload is unmanageable. So this is from last year's survey from the National Education Union. And they found that just under 50% of teachers say their workload is either unmanageable or unmanageable most of the time, which is up 35% from 2021. So many teachers are feeling like they just don't have any more capacity to meet the needs of young people. And when we go out and speak to teachers, we hear that they just feel they don't have the training or the support to be able to meet the needs of all these diverse needs that are coming are being presented, but also that maybe we're always there, but we didn't have a language to talk about these challenges. So really important for us to remember that we don't want to be adding to teachers' workload. This is not about making it more challenging for teachers. This is about making it easier for everybody by serving everybody's needs, including the neurotypical children, of which there's a lot of debate as to whether there is such a thing as a neurotypical child, but the average child, one might say, but also alongside their neurodivergent peers, so that we can meet everybody's needs in the same setting. And I do firmly believe that is possible. And here I'm going to be outlining my thinking on that as we go through today. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about executive functioning, and that's to help us to understand kind of my approach to neurodiversity and what that looks like, and our societal understanding of that too. So I would love to hear on Mentimeter, please, if you could rate your knowledge of executive functioning. So this will create a lovely graph for us. We can see the distribution. As a geographer, I always love a live graph. There's nothing more exciting than a graph that is being created by the audience. So we've only had 13 people fill this out yet. We've got way more than that online. So please do get involved. Pranal has just posted the link in the chat. So please do get involved in this so I can see. Super. So we've got a very knowledgeable audience today, which is amazing. Good, really good to see. Very few people who have never heard of executive functions before, and quite a few people skewed towards the other end. So that's wonderful. I will skim over quite a few of the slides, but making sure that those people who haven't heard of executive functions before aren't left behind as well. So thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. So executive functions are the cognitive processes, which means what the brain is doing, which reside in the prefrontal cortex of our brain. They are responsible for the effective and timely execution of tasks and emotional regulation. So that part of our brain helps us to execute tasks, to get things done. That's why it's called executive function, because it's about executing tasks. And a lot of people ask me if executive functions are so important, because I like to talk about them a lot to anyone who will listen. Why don't we all know about them? Why isn't this common knowledge? And that's really because there's this field of neuroscience that has developed very much over the last 30 years or so, since the advent of fMRI scanners, where we've been able to look at people's live brains and see what area of the brain lights up when we do certain things. Before then, we just had to kind of deduce from various brain damage or things that had happened to someone's brain. Oh, interesting, that means that's affected their ability to reason. That must be that part of the brain. But now we can actually look and see what the brain is doing whilst we're doing these complex tasks in a scanner. So scientists have only discovered executive functions are cognitive processes and not what we thought previously in society, that they were kind of character traits or character flaws. And that's because of the advent of fMRI scanners. So who is affected? Every single human on this earth has a unique executive function fingerprint, and it changes depending on things that are going on for them as well. So every single person in every single school, and I go and do this training for Ernst & Young and for Citibank and for lots of very high achieving people, they all need understanding their executive functions too. So this is not just for a subset of society who are different, odd, but actually this is for everybody to get involved with understanding better. And what does it mean for our lives? So it's these kind of things which are really important. So it's our ability to meet deadlines, to prioritize the work that we complete, which bit to do first, to regulate our emotions, to keep calm when we're struggling with things, to inhibit our responses, to stop ourselves from doing things we might instinctually want to do, to organize our belongings and keep things tidy, to organize our thoughts in paper, whether we're writing an essay or a report or any kind of written communication, even an email, to hold information in our heads, that's our working memory, to keep time. Now, this is a really interesting one because if you travel a lot, as I do, you'll notice that different cultures have different relationships with time. And in the West, in England and America and in Europe and in other parts of the world, we have a very culturally, we value punctuality very, very highly, but it is not a universal value, human value, which is really interesting. So if you travel to the Middle East or to parts of Africa, you will notice it's a very different relationship with punctuality and timekeeping. So just something to bear in mind that it is a cultural construct. It's not something that's universal. And finally, our ability to think flexibly, to be able to shift and change our thinking depending on new information that's coming at us from the environment. So we're going to look at some self-reflection now. So disregard the bit about the children. So your own challenges now. Which of these do you struggle with? So this will create a nice little kind of donut graph for us, which is like a pie chart. And you can choose as many of these as you like. Let's see what we get. Okay, first results are coming in. Super. Okay. So we've got about a good proportion of the audience that's filled this out. And so really interesting to notice that the more people that fill this out, the more evenly spread these challenges are, right? So that's really important to remember. So the larger distribution of people, the more evenly spread it is, which means that everybody struggles with these things. So for any group of people, you will find people who struggle with all of these things. It's a natural and normal part of being human, and actually what differentiates us from machines and robots. Our difficulties with these things. And something I believe to be valued in an era of AI and various other things. So really interesting to see this distribution. The two that are coming out top is this one, 18 or 19 here, prioritizing work to be completed. So that's really hard, especially when you're a teacher. This always comes out high when we're looking at people who are working in schools. And then holding information in our heads, that's our working memory there as well. But also we've got keeping time, our punctuality, organizing our belongings, keeping things tidy, and across the board, we struggle with all of these things, okay? So it's a natural and normal part of being human. My next question is, last time you struggled, what emotions did you feel? How did it make you feel last time you struggled with the things on the previous slide? Okay, now as we're looking at these responses coming in and this word cloud, I just want you to think about the kind of types of emotions that these emotions are. I do this talk at least twice a week, and every single time frustration comes out top, but we've got other things like anxious, stressed, overwhelmed, exhausted, annoyed, frustrated, discouraged, muddled, irritated, confused, fear, embarrassed, demotivated. These are really challenging emotions. These are, as one teacher said to me the other day, they're red zone emotions from the zones of regulation. They really are. And I actually like to call them painful emotions, because we know that these type of emotions light up the same part of our brain as when we feel physical pain, and that human beings will do anything, almost anything, to avoid feeling these things. This is not something that anybody wants to feel, okay? And so it's really important to remember that these, when we struggle with these things, that we feel these really challenging emotions. So thank you so much for that. So my next question is, given that when we're born, we don't feel these feelings of shame and fear and frustration around our executive functions, what is at the root cause of these emotions? Where does it come from? Where do we learn that we should feel frustrated when our executive functions let us down, that we should feel ashamed, that we should feel hopeless? Where does that come from? Just pop your responses in there. The expectations of others, negative feedback from our parents and those around us, wanting to do well, comparing ourselves with others, cultural expectations, expectations, people pleasing, societal expectations. So well done, everybody. You're right on the money there. It is absolutely social expectations. And what happens in our society, for various different historical reasons, we have a culture whereby the majority of people, what we call mask or hide their executive function challenges, because they are told by society that's something to be ashamed of. And so neurodivergent people do that more than other people, but everybody to some extent hides how much they find these things difficult from others, so that there's this appearance of neurotypical people who find these things easy, and neurodivergent people who find these things hard. But actually, we all struggle with these things. And one of the most important things we can do to create a neuro-inclusive school is to be explicit about that, to normalize and humanize these challenges. Because when we do that, we make people who struggle with these things more than others perhaps feel less different, and that helps them so much to feel a sense of belonging. And I'll talk about that more as we go through today. So this unconscious bias that we have against neurodivergent traits runs through society. It's like everywhere. So here are some examples of it in schools, but you can also see it, like, for example, the other day, I got a fine for the dart charge because I'd put in my registration number of my hire car with the letters inverted, and they, when I wrote to them, they said, no, sorry, you made a mistake, that's it, you still get the fine, even though I said I was dyslexic and had a disability. So I'm currently fighting that one. But this bias and this punishment of executive function challenges is throughout our society, to the extent that we actually lock people up who have executive function challenges, in terms of our prison system, etc. But at school, what we can see is, these kind of behavior ladders, and the consequences that we get if we struggle with our executive functions. We have here, the shaming of young people who are really struggling with their executive functions, and the ones that are staying on track and doing well, but those that are struggling are put into kind of a pit stop or a timeout. And then we've got, what are the habits for learning success? For example, when we've got down here, I regularly miss homework deadlines, often don't complete my homework or classwork to acceptable standards. I often forgot my book and don't have the right equipment, and I don't concentrate well in lessons. These are all executive function skills here. And what we're seeing here is the discrimination against people who struggle with those things. So it's really important as school leaders to question everything that we do and communicate with young people about their executive function challenges, and remove this idea of shame. As I'll come on to in a minute, these are skills that can be developed, and we wouldn't use shame to develop any other skills in our organisation. So we shouldn't use it for developing executive function skills. So on to a bit more neuroscience now. So I just want to talk a bit about the three core brain functions in our executive functioning. So we've got our cognitive flexibility, that's our brain's ability to shift and change its thinking depending on new information that comes to light. We've got our inhibitory control, our ability to stop ourselves from doing things we might instinctually want to do, and our working memory, our ability to hold information in our heads whilst we're doing complex tasks. Now, these are the three areas of brain function that's found in the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is doing these things for us. And then we have these executive function skills. And the reason we have these skills is because you can't like have a little fMRI scanner on the kind of way into school every day and be like, oh, well done, Freddie, your prefrontal cortex is developing brilliantly today. It would be totally unethical and extremely costly. But what we can do is we can measure and help to develop the skills around these cognitive functions. So you've got here the cognitive functions of working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. But in order to have these skills here, you need to use that part of the brain. So in order to, I'm just going to choose a couple to talk through them. So in order to be goal directed, so to be resilient or to have grit, we need to have a working memory to remember what we're working towards. We need our inhibitory control, not to go off on a tangent. And we need our cognitive flexibility to overcome any barriers or obstacles as we're working towards our goal. My one that I struggle with is my organization. I'm constantly losing my phone all over the house. And in order to not put my phone in the fridge, which is where I found it the other day, I need my working memory to remember where I left it. I need my inhibitory control not to put it in the fridge when my daughter comes to me, she's fallen over, and I need my cognitive flexibility to think, hang on just 1 second, I'm just going to put it down somewhere where I'm going to be able to find it, maybe in a place that is commonly for phones, a basket or something like that, so that I can find it later or come up with some other solution. So you can see how we need these brain functions in order to have these skills, and the skills definitions are all in your handouts for you, so you can obviously take those away and print at your will. Pranal, I think, is going to post the handout link into the chat again for us. Super. So executive function skills. So you probably gathered now that you need a lot of executive function skills for learning to participate in class discussions, to self-reflect, to write essays, to complete homework, to complete revision, and of course to complete exams. So all the kind of mechanics of the learning require executive functioning, but also the research is really clear that we also need executive function skills for the kind of academic learning too. So in order to be good at maths, you need really good cognitive flexibility and working memory in order to be able to absorb the information from the question or the equation that needs to be done, to play with that mentally in your mind, and to then put that information back down on paper. So the cognitive functioning around mathematics requires the prefrontal cortex to be activated, as well as for literacy, as well for comprehension. For example, you need to be able to read text, remember what's in the text, that's your working memory. Then you need to be able to answer a question, so you need your cognitive flexibility to decode what was in the text and write an answer that specifically answers that question. So that's a cognitive flexibility piece there. And all of that time you need the response inhibition, not to run off and do something much more fun that your brain would much rather be doing. So in order to excel at school, we need strong executive functioning. People often ask me, okay, so why is it that some children struggle with these things more than others? And that extends to adults as well. Why do some adults struggle with these things more than others? And this diagram is a really great way of showing. So you might see these kind of behaviors at school. You might see rule breaking, swearing, emotional outbursts, being disruptive, shouting out in class, forgetting things easily. Maybe it's just incomplete homework or struggling to get things down on paper. Or maybe they're just quiet and compliant at school, but explosive at home. So you might not see any issues at school, but when they get home, parents report that it's really challenging to manage their behavior. And often that gets attributed to the parenting, and it's poor parenting. But actually, what's happening is the child is holding it together, using all of their effort to exhibit neurotypical behavior at school. And when they get home, they're in a psychologically safe place, and they can kind of let it all hang out. And that can be very upsetting and disruptive for families. So when we see these kind of behaviors, what is underneath that, as we've seen from our word cloud earlier, is these feelings, these very strong red zone feelings of shame, guilt, feeling unlovable, fear, hopelessness, frustration, and isolation. But the root cause of executive function challenges is not the choice of the child, right? It's really important to remember that the research very clearly shows that there's a genetic predisposition, that it runs in families, but also that psychological trauma, either acute, so that's a one single event, or chronic, so it's over a longer period, maybe less severe. This psychological trauma impacts the development of the prefrontal cortex, and we can actually see a difference in brain architecture in children who have experienced trauma. And it's really important to remember neither of those things are the choice of the child. The child is not choosing to behave in these ways. It is a response that their brains have learned in a way to keep them safe, but it may not appear in that way when we first look at it. So we'll dig into that a bit more as we go on. So just quickly on the link between executive functions and neurodivergent traits. So there's a very strong link between executive functions and ADHD. They're kind of interchangeable terms. And this is Professor Russell Barkley here, who is like the godfather of ADHD, just talking about that. This is published last year, just showing the link between dyslexia and dyscalculia and all of the executive function skills there you can see. And also there's rafts of research about the link between ASD, or autism spectrum disorder, hate that word, and executive functioning too. So happy to share those links to those research if anyone is interested in reading more. So I like to kind of simplify these things to help us to understand more about what's going on. And what we have to remember is that these diagnoses that we have were a way of describing a group of traits or symptoms, which I don't like that word because it suggests that there's something wrong with the person that needs to be fixed. But these different traits that we've seen, and we're kind of grouping those traits together to help make sense of what's going on and to help us to provide a support to meet the needs of that child. So what's really interesting is that autistic traits really closely correlate with that cognitive flexibility piece. So that main core executive function. So when we struggle, when plans change, when we struggle to see things from other people's perspectives, that's kind of our cognitive flexibility, and that's kind of really closely linked to autistic traits. When we struggle with our inhibitory control, when we do things impulsively, when we're hyperactive, that is linked to our ADHD. And then when we struggle, when we have dyslexic traits, often those are really strongly linked to our working memory. And there's a lot of discourse around actually dyslexia not being a language difference, but actually more to do with the phonological working memory, the decoding of the language and the encoding of the language itself. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our brain and our brain states, because it's really important to remember that executive function skills are not kind of static. So we can't all access our executive functions in the same way all the time. So we have our prefrontal cortex, which we like to think of as like the air traffic controller of our brain, where we can think before we act. And then we have our threat detector, the amygdala, and that part of that brain is charged with keeping us safe, because our brain's primary function is not learning, it is keeping us safe. And if the learning enables us to keep us safe, then that's great. But what will happen is if the amygdala feels there's any kind of threat, it will divert energy away from the prefrontal cortex, where we think before we act, and into those instinctual survival responses where we act before we think. And so when we're seeing naughty behavior, it is an instinctual response where we're acting before we think, again, and not a choice a child is making. And there's a hand model of the brain you can use with young people, which is really useful to help them to understand a bit more about what's going on for them when they're dysregulated, when this naughty behavior comes out for them. And I don't like to call it naughty behavior, but that's what people talk about, just to help us to understand better. So if you put your hand up like this, I'll show you how to do it. So what you do is you fold your thumb across the palm of your hand like that, and you've got this knobbly bit of your thumb that sticks out. Now that's the amygdala. Then we've got the cortex, and specifically the prefrontal cortex that sits over the top here. Now the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala are kind of constantly having a little conflab here, like how safe is everything? Is everything okay? What's going on? And the amygdala is always receiving the information in the environment and looking for patterns of when something dangerous has happened in the past and helping us to avoid kind of danger. And then if something dangerous does happen, helping us to avoid, to get away from that through our fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or flop responses. Now what happens is if the amygdala senses a threat, whether real or perceived, and it's really important to remember that, because you may think, my goodness, why is this child becoming so dysregulated? I can't see anything that kind of triggers it. And that can just be because of a pattern of something that's happened. Then what happens is the prefrontal cortex disconnects from the amygdala. That frontoamygdala connection that keeps that lid on is severed or neurologically kind of disconnects. And what happens is the amygdala can take control of the brain and our instinctual responses take over. At that point, what we say is we've flipped our lid. So we've flipped our lid, and we are unable to access our kind of rational thought-making part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex. And it takes milliseconds for this to happen, for the lid to flip, and it takes about 20 minutes on average for this to happen. It can take a lot longer, or it can be shorter if we've practiced it a lot. But just like anything, we can get better and better at it. It's really important to remember that when we are seeing what we socially are trained to see as bad behavior, what we're actually seeing is distressed behavior, that the amygdala is feeling unsafe and is doing its best to keep the body safe. That may be maladaptive, and then that it's actually not helping keep it safe, it's causing more problems, but that is what is happening in the brain. So it's distress that we see. So we need to reframe our language from naughtiness or bad behavior to distressed behavior. It's also really important to note the link between trauma and executive functioning. And I touched on this earlier, and this is research coming out of the Harvard Center on the Developing Child. So I think we can all agree, one of the world's top institutions. And they have found that the architecture of the brain changes if we have experienced stress when we are in early childhood. So you can see here, the prefrontal cortex is smaller, and the amygdala is actually enlarged because it's doing more work. And the prefrontal cortex hasn't had a chance to do as much work, so it's not as large. And so you can imagine children who've experienced trauma really find it difficult to stay regulated, but also to regulate themselves again. And they need a lot of support to do that, to help them learn it. They can, absolutely, but they need support. They definitely don't need shame and punishment. Also, adults, it can affect adults too. So even if we've had the most idyllic childhood, and we've got a really strong frontoamygdala connection, if we experience a bereavement or a big shock like COVID, then we can get like brain fog, and it can be difficult to be able to get anything done. And this affects us too. So really important to remember when anyone's experienced a bereavement, or if everyone's going through anything really shocking, that will affect the prefrontal cortex, because the amygdala will have taken over the survival mode. So at Connections in Mind, we've kind of pulled from all the research that's done in this area to come up with these 8 building blocks of strong executive functioning, because in order for the prefrontal cortex to do its work, it needs kind of almost the perfect environment to do that. And if any of these blocks are kind of struggling a bit, then we won't be able to function to the best of our ability. So we need to feel safe, and that's physically and psychologically safe. And so many of the young people we work with say they don't feel safe in school, and that's something we really need to work on. They need exercise, we need connection, so that feeling of belonging and feeling loved is really important and very closely linked to that safety as well. We need to have fun, we need to feel feelings of joy, we need to feel calm, calm. So that's our kind of mindfulness and yoga and going for a walk in nature. We need to sleep well. Obviously, a massive problem with smartphones and the age that we're in right now with young people. And then food, really a balanced diet with slow release energy, avoiding kind of ultra processed food and keeping on to those kind of natural foods as much as possible. So I'm going to focus on connection and belonging because it's a real area of interest for me, because I think it is the need that is least likely to be met in the school environment, and the one that children are often crying out for. So let's just have a look at why connection and belonging is so key to personal development. So there is this process called neuroception, whereby our whole subconscious, our whole nervous system is evaluating clues through the amygdala and looking to see whether there's safety or danger in our environment. Okay, and so our body is constantly doing this. We're not completely unaware of it. It's just subconscious. And we're also kind of linked up with other humans in our environment too. So if anyone around us becomes dysregulated, if there's any kind of patterns of anything in the past that's been dangerous for us, then our amygdala can be sound the alarm and can divert energy away from the prefrontal cortex, the executive functions, and into that more instinctual responses. So neuroception is such an important concept to understand. And the importance of the connection with other people is such an important part of it. And so what happens currently, traditionally, in traditional school settings with traditional behaviour policies, is that we see this unexpected behaviour here in the pink. And when we see this unexpected, or what we now know as distress behaviour, the response is for the most part, punishment. Get a detention, be shouted at, be shamed, whatever it is. And that makes that person feel unwanted, alone, and misunderstood. And then they become more dysregulated. So it makes them, so they're already dysregulated, they already flipped their lid, and it makes them even more dysregulated. So then they show even more unexpected behavior, and then they get even more punishment. And so the cycle continues. And so we find many young people who come into our service who are in this vicious spiral of constant punishment, which makes them feel alone and isolated, and then they just keep going. So we need to break this cycle, and we need to take the punishment element out of there and replace that with connection. And when we do that, it completely changes the outcomes for young people. So here are some case studies. So this is Ralia. So Ralia struggles with her flexibility and metacognition. And in this particular one, the house parent, so this was in a boarding school environment, uses the behaviour policy, and she feels it's unfair. Ralia becomes dysregulated, and she mutters something under her breath, like, oh, that's unfair. The house parent becomes dysregulated and then questions Ralia, what did you say? Ralia loses control of her behaviour, and the house parent escalates according to behaviour policy. So you can see here that when Ralia became dysregulated, the house parent had a chance there to use their own self-regulation strategies to not become dysregulated because she said that, and to get curious about what was going on for Ralia. But because they did get dysregulated, it was like two flipped lids, and it all kind of escalated from there. And our role as educators is to, as far as possible, remain regulated, and if not, to check in, check out with other teachers or other professionals to meet the needs of that young person. This is another case study. This is Kit. He doesn't have a formal diagnosis, but he struggles with sustained attention, time management, task initiation challenges. He is charming in class and has a really strong verbal ability, but he's chronically late, he's always dishevelled, and always has an excuse, like grandma's died 3 times this year. He performs well in tests, but he could do better, and he's given the benefit of doubt at primary school. But at secondary school, he doesn't get that benefit of the doubt. They can have to be consistent. And so these strikes and detentions accumulate for him, and he's constantly in trouble. And he has this crisis of confidence. Who am I? Am I this likable, lovable person that everyone loved at primary school? Or am I this naughty boy that's constantly in detention? And he's not being given the skills to get himself out of this loop. And we've got Emily. So Emily also doesn't have a formal diagnosis, but she struggles with metacognition, flexibility, and working memory. And she often makes out-of-place comments. She struggles to make friends and sits alone at playtimes. And the other girls tease her about her shoes. She seems engaged in school, but she's not reaching her potential, and parents struggle to get her into school. So what's happening there with Emily is that she's in what we call the fawn state of response. She doesn't feel safe in school because she doesn't feel like she belongs there. And that impacts her ability to access her prefrontal cortex. Then finally, we've got Leon. Leon has sustained attention, goal-directed persistence and response inhibition challenges. And they have, at his school, decided on a positive reinforcement policy because they don't want to go down the route of detentions, etc. And so he starts school trying really hard. But because of the challenges he has, he never reaches that benchmark to get the kind of star of the week in these areas. He feels misunderstood and othered, like he doesn't belong, and he stops trying eventually. Then his behavior deteriorates down to his kind of normal, and his nervous system adapts to seek out connection through acting out. Because what happens is, as his behavior deteriorates, he's getting the what we call attention of the teacher, but actually what he's getting is connection. Maybe not the nicest form of connection, but he is getting some connection with the teacher. And so the nervous system unconsciously adapts to seek out this connection through acting out. And it's really important to remember when we hear ourselves saying, oh, they're just doing that for attention, substitute that with connection, and that will really help us to understand what that child needs. So you might have noticed the link between this diagram and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, okay? And really important to remember, back in the 1940s, without the understanding of the neuroscience of what's going on, Maslow kind of came up with this hierarchy of needs, very closely represents what we now know from the neuroscience, that psychological safety, physiological needs, psychological and physical safety, love and belonging, esteem are all essential before we can get to growth. Okay, so we need to feel all of these things. And the love and belonging is such an essential part that I think is often missing. And what is belonging? What does it actually mean to belong somewhere? Well, equality is like being invited to the party, so you get the invite. Inclusion is being asked to dance, to partake in what's going on. But belonging is that feeling of dancing like nobody's watching, that feeling of being your true self without any judgment or shame. And that's really important for us to remember. It's also really, really important for us to remember that the opposite of belonging is fitting in. So if we have a school system where we expect children to change who they are to fit into what we can offer them, then we are not meeting their needs. So we need to create school environments that are designed with them in mind, and only then will they feel that sense of belonging. So just thinking about our case studies, so Ralia and Kit and Emily and Leon, how do you think they're doing in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? You might need to make some assumptions. But especially I'm interested in that kind of love and belonging section there. There we go. First responses are in there. Okay. Okay, really interesting to see. Yeah, I totally agree. You know, their needs are not being met by the system. And I think often when we think of special educational needs, we think of their needs as being different from other human beings, but actually it's not. They need the same things. They're just not getting them in the way that the system was designed for average humans, where there's no such thing as an average human because we are all different and we all naturally develop differently. So I think it's really important to remember to focus on making sure we provide a safe, not only the physiological needs are met, but also those needs for psychological safety and the feeling of love and belonging are essential for all children in our care. And just because neurodivergent children present in a different way doesn't mean they're any less worthy of having these needs met. So just to re-emphasize here, you know, as we all know, when we have poor self-talk, we get poor self-image, poor performance, and then it spirals down and down again. So the more we are presenting to young people that they should be ashamed of their executive function challenges, the more they will internalize that, the more it will affect their performance, and it will spiral down and down and down. Whereas when we present executive function skills as skills that can be developed, and we develop them just the same way as we do our geometry skills and our language skills, when we do it that way, we build self-esteem in young people and help them to realize that they are human and not different. So what we want to do is we want to change the dialogue, the internal dialogue, from I'm lazy, I'm not organized enough, I don't belong here, what's wrong with me? This is the kind of self-talk of a lot of the young people that we work with. We want to change that to I'm working on my skills. It's going to take time to master, but my teacher understands me and I am enough just as I am. And that's so important for young people. And we can use the hand model of the brain to help them to understand what's going on. When we have these kind of internal self-dialogue, our prefrontal cortex is able to do its work, but when we're here, then it will be flipped up and we're less able to access our prefrontal cortex. So it's so important that we re-emphasize this kind of mindset. So on to what we can do now, which is so important. So a neuro-inclusive school nurtures the whole brain of every child, and there's 4 key factors that we have discovered through all of our research. So the first one is a relational approach to self-discipline, and this is a variety of different thinkers in this area. So we've got Laurie de Saltis, who's pictured here with a kind of fluffy neuron that she's showing young people. We've got Dave Whitaker, and we've got Brighton and Hove, who have done the trauma-informed behavior policies as well. So this relational approach, building relationships with young people, helping them to understand themselves and not feel ashamed of their challenges, and build that self-discipline from within rather than shaming young people into compliance, is absolutely the way that we need to go. We also need to focus on belonging and not fitting in, making sure that we remember that fitting in is something the individual does in order to try to feel that sense of belonging, but it's never fulfilling. And belonging is something an institution does to bring that person into the hub of what we're doing. And I should mention, this is Professor Catherine Riley here. She's done a lot of thinking on this area, and there's some fantastic books that I'm going to be signposting in a minute that she has written on exactly this point. Also, we need to embed this executive function skills approach. We need to humanize the challenges that we all kind of hide from each other to appear neurotypical. Actually, we need to make sure that explicitly teaching these things and developing these skills just the same as we do other skills. So that's about building this executive function literacy for us all to be talking about it, and to use a mental contrasting pedagogy as well. Which enables us to work with whole classes to help them to deploy strategies that work for them, rather than the teacher running around and deploying all sorts of different strategies for different people and exhausting themselves. So it's very much about putting the child at the center of supporting themselves, rather than expecting the adults around them to do that. And finally, we've got the importance of teaching staff who model self-compassion and self-care. It's really important to remember the building blocks of strong executive functioning, and that if we don't have those building blocks met, then we won't be able to function properly in terms of our prefrontal cortex and our executive functioning. So our teaching staff need to be modeling that to children, and we need to prioritize our self-care so that we can do our best work. And that does not mean pushing ourselves to the edge like many of us do. So our approach is very much around these 3 core elements. The first one is connect. So that's connecting the prefrontal cortex and getting the executive functions online, but also connecting with the young people in our care. They both happen in the same way. Then it's collaboration. It's about working alongside young people, not telling them what to do, but supporting them to develop the skills that they need to reach their goals. And then finally, it's about supporting this development over the longer term, because it's not just about having a chat one day with someone about something. We need to support and develop that skill just the same as we develop our literacy and our numeracy. If we think about how many times we have to sit down with a child to develop their reading skills, it's exactly the same with developing their executive function skills. So here's some further reading for you. Please feel free to take a screenshot if you'd like. So this is Dave Whitaker. So he, in the kindness principle, he is the headmaster of various alternate provisions and PRUs. So working with the most challenging children in society and how relational approach to behaviour management really can work. Then we've got Laurie DeSaltis, who I talked about. She was the one with the fluffy neuron, talking about connection over compliance and the importance of that for development. And then a really great book from Ross Green called Lost at School, which takes you through various scripts of how to engage with parents and children in this kind of inclusional way. We've also got executive function skills in the classroom. This is the activated learning approach, which is such an important part of the work that we do and just absolutely essential to create that neuro-inclusive approach. Compassionate leadership from school belonging, that's Catherine Riley. It really is a fantastic resource and it's available for free on her website if you want to download it. And then we've got Brené Brown and Dare to Lead. You know, as leaders in pioneering anything new, we really need to kind of get on board with that, but also understanding the importance of belonging. She talks a lot about that in this work and various other works that she has. It's also really important to remember we're here to help. We are a CIC, which means we're a community interest company. And we are like halfway between a charity and a business. So we're a non-profit, but everything that we do, every money that we get in gets put towards our services. So we're non-profit, but we are sustainable in that respect. And we serve our neurodivergent community. So our community that we serve as a community interest company is neurodivergent people. So we exist to support our community. We offer one-to-one coaching, training in CPD, as you can see today, and support as well in terms of our Connected Club, which is an incredible resource for neurodivergent people to come together once or twice a week. And we just talk about how hard it is living in a neurotypical world. So really great for anyone who's struggling out there, or even if you're not struggling and just want to hear from other neurodivergent people too. We also offer accredited professional training. So we have our executive function coach training for schools and also neuro-inclusive classroom practice, which is 5 additional professional standards that sit alongside qualified teacher status and help teachers to really kind of break down what we need to do in order to be neuro-inclusive in our classrooms. So anyone who's interested in that, please get in contact and I'm very happy to help. We offer 4 levels of accreditation because we know that this isn't about just attending one webinar or one training session and then, oh, all of a sudden I'm an expert in this. It takes a lot of training and development. And we never actually become complete experts in anything and know everything about it. We're always kind of working towards that mastery and constantly learning and developing. So level 1 is knowledge of the approach. Level 2 is competence at the approach. Level 3 is advanced competence at the approach. And level 4 is mastery. And that when you get to level 4, then you're kind of trained to go off and train other people in the approach too. We have our autumn executive function coach training coming up, and that starts on the 8th of October. So we've only got 6 spots available. It's super popular. So I do recommend signing up. And I think Pranel's about to pop into the chat a coupon code. So we're going to give 2 people £50 off each of these places. So please do make use of that coupon if you would like to sign up. The dates are here, and I think Pranel's also put the link so you can read more about the coach training as well. Lots of the schools that we work with start off with training a couple of coaches to work within their school who then become the kind of executive function pioneers, and that works towards then a rollout across the whole school. You can see it's the same as our core executive function coach training, but we also have session 6, which is to do with how to communicate what they have learned to the wider community. So how to hold presentations for staff and for parents, how to screen for executive function challenges, and generally how to roll out a whole school approach across a school. Also, just want to flag up that we have our website CIM Learning, which has got loads of amazing resources that you can access, and we're available on all of these as well. Super. So that's the end of that. I did want to just finish off by doing a little poll, if I can here. So I'm going to launch this poll here. So for those of you who would like some more information, please do just click on what you're interested in here, and we will send you some information about that. So you'll get an email from somebody called Megan, who's wonderful, one of our lovely team, who will give you more information about that. So please do just fill that out if you're interested in any more information. I will be staying on after this webinar, so if you do want to stay on, we will be having just a bit of a Q&A session with anyone who wants to know. I'm going to be on for 15 more minutes. So please do stay on if you're interested, and we will answer any questions or queries that you have. Thank you so much for your attention. It's been wonderful having you all here. And I really hope that you're going to share everything that you've learned today with everyone